This is Regenerative Skills, the podcast helping you to learn the skills and solutions to create an abundant and connected future. I'm your host, Oliver Gaucher. Through their diverse range of publications, New Society Publishers' books explore topics that are at the forefront of creating positive change in our world. From regenerative agriculture and permaculture to social justice and eco-conscious living, their books cover a wide spectrum of subjects that empower readers to lead more regenerative and fulfilling lives. Now, whether you're a seasoned environmentalist, a curious beginner, or someone simply seeking inspiration and guidance on your journey towards regenerative living, New Society Publishers is here to support you every step of the way. Now, exclusively for listeners of this podcast, you can use the code SKILLS25 and receive a 25% discount on all ebooks at newsociety.com. That's all one word and lowercase, SKILLS25 on all ebooks. So level up your knowledge today at newsociety.com. Hey there everybody and welcome back. So as I continue to make connections and find people in my local area who are working on regenerative projects and supporting progress in Spain and the Iberian Peninsula, I've been amazed with the talented, courageous, and inspiring people that I've come into contact with. I've already interviewed a few in recent episodes such as Sara Garcia and Aline Moerbeke, and I'm pleased to add another local badass to that list in today's conversation. For frequent listeners to this show, you'll remember that I've been through the trainings from the Savory Institute and have integrated holistic management as a core practice, both in the development of my own farm and in the support and the services that I offer to clients. I've also been working to connect with the larger holistic management network here in Spain. There are now 2 Savory Hubs on the peninsula. There's AleJab, which operate mostly in the southwest and Portugal, and 2 years ago, Hub del Norte opened up, based at Curly Creek Ranch in Navarra, the home base and farm of its founder, Meghan Sapp. Megan is the co-hub leader at Hub del Norte for the Savory Network and an accredited field professional serving the northern Iberian Peninsula. She has practiced holistic management together with her husband Inigo for more than 6 years on their farm, which recently became EOV, or Ecosystem Outcome Verification, verified. Megan is also a founding farmer for the European Alliance for Regenerative Agriculture, a former negotiator for the UN Committee on Food Security, and is part of many local farming and food sovereignty organizations. Megan has spent more than 2 decades dedicated to the energy and food systems transition as a journalist, policy advocate, entrepreneur, community organizer, and project developer as well. For this episode, I had the rare pleasure of hosting Megan at my own farm, even though we're in the middle of construction and the place is a disaster. She was passing through in between training events in my area of Catalunya, and I couldn't pass up the opportunity to show her what my partner Alba and I are working on. Now, in this fun and literal fireside chat, Megan tells me her unique story about her journey from running multiple newspapers in California all the way to farming in the Basque region of northern Spain and teaching holistic land management. We talk about the broad uses and case studies for holistic planning and decision-making beyond livestock farming, the journey of starting Hub del Norte and the work that they've been doing in the region, the challenges of lobbying for regenerative farm policy at the European Union level, and generally getting an insight into the life and work of someone dedicated to creating a transformation of the agri-food system. If these topics are interesting to you and inspire you the way that they do for me, I would recommend that you look for whichever regional Savory Network hub is closest to you to explore these ideas with those talented people further. And with this intro out of the way, I'll hand things over now to Meghan Sapp. So, I guess I have actually not heard your proper backstory. You gave us a backstory when you gave a presentation for our team at Climate Farmers, but how do you introduce yourself to others? How do you tell people about where you came from and how you got to where you are now?
Well, gosh, that's a very long story that I will try to make extremely short and somewhat interesting, which isn't always the same thing. So I'm originally from San Francisco, California, and I grew up in this very bizarre region that was semi-urban up against a regional park where it was full of cowboys and horses and cows and pickup trucks, and I identified with that and thought I was one of those. Mm-hmm. So grew up riding horses, working at my grandma's horse ranch about 45 minutes outside San Francisco, And that was my whole life. So when it came time to go to college, I was like, I'm going to go and marry a cowboy and raise and train horses. And that was my life. But life happened. I went to Montana State University, straight out of college, studied livestock management, and quickly found out that the cowboys actually like these, little 5'6", big hip, tiny waist, big boob blonde who do barrel racing. And that was absolutely not me.
Yeah.
So that's about the time when I found writing, journalism. Dropped out of college after 2 years, became an agriculture journalist, started writing for magazines, went on to working for newspapers, wound up, because that's who I am, running 2 weekly newspapers in the California Central Coast at 22.
Wow.
Yeah, I had a staff of 30 in 2 different locations, and I peaked too young, right? So I was like, okay, so there's got to be more to life than this. I won a stipend from the International Federation of Agriculture Journalists to go to Finland. I was like, oh, girl with a passport, never had really left, like gone to Canada, gone to Mexico, but never really left before. Went to Finland and just was thrown into this community of agriculture journalists from around the world. That was September 2001. So I was on a bus doing farm tours in northern Finland with people from like 30 different countries, and just amazing experience when everybody's Nokia phones started going off. And that was when the planes had flown into the Twin Towers.
Wow.
And all of a sudden, America closed its airspace. Myself, 2 other Americans, and 2 Canadians were quote unquote stuck. Couldn't go home. And so what I found was a community of people who just welcomed us with open arms, took us into their homes, and showed me what life on the other side could be like. And so for that first year after 9/11, I was coming over to Europe every 6 weeks because people were too afraid to fly. And it was really cheap from California. And I was coming over all the time, going to all these agriculture conferences, meeting farmers, going to farms, writing up a storm. And it came clear quickly that it was a lot cheaper to be on this side of the water than to be on that. So I had the opportunity to go to the same conference again in Valencia. Finished on a Thursday. Who's going to go home on a Thursday? Closed my eyes, put my finger on the map, and it said Sevilla. So I said, okay, I'll go to Sevilla for the weekend. Fell absolutely in love with Sevilla, went home and quit my job.
Wow.
I was like, okay, here we go. I've asked my mom several times how long this European adventure was originally meant to last, because I don't remember. And she's like, oh, a year. So that was well over 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And so that was the start of everything. And then from there, I was a freelance journalist traveling around Europe. I went to 20-something European countries reporting for US-based magazines, farm magazines, about the common agriculture policy, agriculture technology, all this stuff. Ran out of money because Sevilla is all about the party and not about the work.
Yep.
Ran out of money. Went to Brussels. Started reporting about the common agriculture policy reform. Really got into that. Ran out of money. Went to London. Worked for Dow Jones, Wall Street Journal. Learned about the global sugar markets. Then sugar, coffee, cocoa, cereals, EU expansion, the whole 9 yards.
All these commodity crops.
All these commodity crops.
Yeah.
It's how I began to understand how the quote unquote real world works.
Yeah.
Right? Supply, demand, big players, how the money moves within the what we now call the agri-food ecosystem, but back then was just the market.
Yeah.
And my biggest concern was being able to differentiate between reality and people talking their book. So that was my day to day. Got completely frustrated, burnt out. Was completely moved by what African countries were suffering as a result of the EU Common Agriculture Policy reform, especially those who had been selling sugar to Europe for 5 centuries. They were really getting the short end of the stick as a result of the World Trade Organization changing how the European Union works with Africa, Caribbean, Pacific countries. So I felt that I was losing my neutrality. I grew up with old school journalism, so you should be unbiased, right? No left, no right. And I felt that bias very much going towards the plight of the African countries. So I quit my job again and moved to Brussels to become a lobbyist. So I became a lobbyist for the least developed countries during the EU sugar reform. I was still only like 25, but somehow I had managed to get into the right circles. And that was just an amazing 34 years of beginning to understand how all, so I understood how commodity markets work, but then I understood how trade worked, how diplomacy was working, how relations between the EU and African and other developing countries. But as a result of the EU sugar reform and everything getting completely screwed over for them, I saw the opportunity of what was at that time biofuel diplomacy. It was Brazil trying to take its technology to Africa to produce biofuels, to produce ethanol from sugarcane.
Yeah.
And that was the biggest opportunity at that time for these countries who had lost their market. They could no longer send sugar to Europe, or at least at the prices that they were getting before. They had to do something. So I started a trade organization called Pangea, Partners for Euro-African Green Energy, to help those African countries with technology transfer, to secure the investment in order to do that, to create the policies required for that energy transition. And then that all moved into the Renewable Energy Directive in Europe, food versus fuel, land grabbing. And that's when the question about sustainability really started. Back then, sustainability wasn't a word, but the concepts were starting to emerge. So, being in balance with the environment, being in balance with social issues, not taking advantage of the communities, the host communities that you're going into to develop these projects, because it was really becoming a carpetbagger situation. And so anyway, I was very much moved by all of this, but quickly was understanding that the large-scale Brazilian model wasn't what worked in Europe, wasn't what worked in Africa, sorry. So trying to find other ways, right? So what we could see was there was a lot of manufacturing, food production, whatever, that had energy risk and had environmental risk. And there was no environmental policy there to slow that all down. So changed again, became a project developer, and really trying to focus on finding smaller scale technologies to blend into existing manufacturing, predominantly in food and agriculture. So started trying to develop those models in Africa. At that point in time, still being in Brussels and being completely over the all talk and no do, I had the opportunity to go to Vitoria in Spain for 3 months. One of these 3 months things. I was completely blown away by this community of small entrepreneurs, all working on tech, all working together, collaborating and getting stuff done with a focus on sustainability and environment, making the world better. And I was like, okay, bye-bye Brussels, I'm done. I'm going to stay here. And that's what I did. 6 months later, met my husband. Oops. And as they say on that, that's all she wrote.
Haven't managed to quit that job yet, have you?
I haven't managed to quit that job yet. The really cool thing was that he also was into renewables. At the time, he was leading the construction of a 55 megawatt cogeneration plant from paper waste in Zaragoza. So we were very much aligned on sustainability and on energy efficiency and waste to energy and this sort of thing. So we started our company, Planet Energy, that was totally focused on place-based efficiency of resources, reduce your energy costs, reduce your water costs, use, what we now call circular economy, circular bioeconomy. Yeah. Back then, again, that wasn't a word. Yeah. I mean, we're talking like 2010, 2011. So we spent a number of years. We visited 60 different farms, trying to find the right place to set up our demonstration facility, because of course, when you're an entrepreneur, they always, investors always say, well, put your money where your mouth is. Sure. Invest first. Show us this works. Well, that's what we did. So we bought an old abandoned farm in the Norte, Navarra, knocked it down, rebuilt it, same physical footprint, but all with bioconstruction, 0 kilometer materials, energy efficiency, completely off grid, solar, wind, batteries, biogas for treating the waste. And so we wanted to show that you could have modern living. We have internet, we've got deep freezers, we have got washing machine, dishwasher, all this stuff. So you can live like that, but place-based, in your space, efficient, sustainable.
Yeah.
So we did that, and that was great, but probably about 10 years ahead of our time. We're seeing kind of a pattern, but it's okay. And so then about 6 years ago, decided it was time to finish, well, a bit more than that. I finished up my degree, my bachelor's online. I was like 20 years later, it's probably time. And one of the courses that they had, the only one that had to do with agriculture or nature, anything online, was holistic management. And so I came across this, was reading the book, taking the course, and was completely bowled over because all of the experiences that I had had building up to this moment with sustainability, bioenergy, agriculture, community development, everything, it just put it all together. It suddenly snapped and made sense.
It's a very elegant system, isn't it?
Absolutely. It was like, yeah, that's what I meant to say.
Yeah.
So we started to implement it at the ranch because we were running the ranch. It was 3.5 hectares. We had 4 horses, raising them the way that my grandma had taught me. And we started to implement holistic management within the first year. The maintenance costs dropped by 80%. And we're like, okay,
there's something to this.
There's something to this. And so that's when we started to really implement holistic management. And then I started training, got accredited, and then the pandemic hit. And so my very travel heavy consulting advisory life came to a screeching halt. And all of a sudden, I had no choice but to look down instead of to look out. And that's when we really started using holistic decision making to start producing food. At this time when we saw, that there was no toilet paper in the grocery stores and no yeast to make bread, and that our neighbors that had traditionally sold their lambs to middlemen, had no more market. It was like, okay, the system is broken. So what can we do? And at this point is when people started asking us, oh, do you have some extra tomatoes? Or do you have some extra, because we were starting to have a garden, and people started to care where their food came from. So we went from having like 6 chickens and 4 tomato plants to having 100 layers and 30 broilers and putting a dozen or so turkeys, because we need to have turkey for Thanksgiving. Of course. Thank you.
A dozen of them.
Yeah, well, one or 2 or 3 or
that's also the only holiday tradition that I've brought over from the States is Thanksgiving.
Do you?
Yeah, I brought that here to Alba and her folks, and that's one we really love.
Yeah. No, of the 20 years I've been in Europe, the only 2 years that I didn't do Thanksgiving wound up being just really horrible years. So there's a lot of voodoo going on.
Gotta give thanks.
Absolutely. And there's got to be a bird.
There's got to be a bird.
So we grow our own birds, and then we expanded the garden. So now we supply, in addition to growing about 70% of our own food, we supply to about 30 different families between Pamplona and San Sebastian. Mm-hmm. Obviously not their whole shopping basket, but pieces. And why? Because people started to care where their food came from. And that's where all the really big shift for us came from. It was like, okay, we have found a way to work with the environment, to work with nature, to produce really healthy food where you can taste the difference. The texture is different, the color, the smell is different.
Indeed.
It's really high quality food, and people are willing to pay for that.
Yeah.
So that's when we really started going down the production side of things. And the pandemic made a lot of changes for a lot of people, and the big one for us was it turned us from consultants into farmers.
Yeah. Man, there's so much in that story that we could take some time and spend an entire episode digging into. I'm curious now, because the way that I got to know you and what you're probably best known for at the moment is being the director of Hub del Norte, which is a savory holistic management hub in the north of Spain.
Yeah.
Tell me about how that has evolved and where we're at now.
So yeah, in June, we're celebrating 2 years
Congratulations.
Thank you, as an accredited hub. And that originally came because the Savory Institute, through its Impact Landed program, was investing in helping transition farmers in the dehesa, the woodland area in Portugal and Spain, down in the south, the Iberian Savannah.
Yeah.
So they were investing heavily there. And, being cheeky as I am, I sent an email to the CEO of the Savory Institute, and I said, great what you guys are doing down there with cattle and desertification. What about us up in the north with, sheep and all of this wool that is going to waste and depopulating communities? What's going on here?
And a decidedly non-brittle climate compared to the south. Very
Absolutely.
different management requirements.
It's a brittle leaning environment, exactly where we are in Navarra.
Okay.
If you look at the brittleness scale, and for those who don't know the brittleness scale, we're talking about the distribution of humidity throughout the year, not the amount.
Yeah.
Because that really, with water being the limiting factor to life, if what we need is nutrient cycling, we need moisture throughout the year to be decomposing that plant material and getting those nutrients back to plants. So without getting too nerdy, the point is where we are, it doesn't rain all year. It rains much of the year, but we also have several months of the year where it doesn't rain and those natural processes come to a halt. So we're in this kind of like brittle leaning, but not non-brittle area. Anyway, whatever. Long story short, I said, what can we do up here? And the response was, well, why don't you open a hub in the Basque Country? Mm-hmm. And I was like, great, but I'm not Basque. I'm very much foreigner. I don't think I would have the credibility to do that. So around that time, started meeting other people who were interested in bringing holistic management to the region. We had originally talked about the Basque Country, so the Spanish side and the French. So we were very clear at the beginning that we needed to be at least trilingual. Mm-hmm. And then I met some colleagues who were interested in taking this down the Pyrenees and getting us into Catalonia as well. So I was like, we'll do that. Great. And then I was like, well, while we're at it, why don't we just do the Cantabrian coast? So we wound up just being the top half of Spain and France. Yeah. Which is a huge area. But what it has in common is its diversity. Diversity of environments, diversity of languages and cultures. Yeah. And, we've got really non-brittle areas like in Galicia, or you've got super brittle areas like in Teruel, right? We can go from 150 millimeters of humidity or rain a year to 2,000. Yeah.
That is a massive difference.
It's a massive difference.
And considering that an arid or desertifying region starts at about 250 millimeters. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But again, it's not how much rain, it's how often.
Exactly.
Yeah. So what's beautiful about holistic management is that this decision-making framework is applicable anywhere. It's all about taking, and that's where the hubs are so important. Because we're spread around the world. There's about 50 of us. And what we do is we take this universal understanding of ecosystem process, of how our decisions affect the land that we're managing, and then apply it to the local context. So for us within Hub del Norte, we have a huge diversity of contexts. But that's also what's super exciting because we're constantly learning and understanding how what we do is different in Catalonia, from Galicia to Cantabria to Navarra, and it's great.
Yeah, that's super exciting. And let's talk about that more because I think that is, unfortunately, one of the less understood aspects of holistic management is that most people associate it, much like permaculture is associated with gardening, holistic management is associated with cattle management. Yeah. Let's talk about this as a holistic management or decision-making framework and how broadly this can be applied.
So that's one of the things that I find really attractive about holistic management. I often say, you can apply it if you're a student living in university housing, or to a young family in an apartment in the city, or to a family farm, or even to your hairdresser on the corner. Because what we're doing is trying to understand complexity in our lives, right? And how everything that we do affects everything else. There was a great quote from a John Kemp podcast some time ago that I loved, which puts it so perfectly. In nature, 1 + 1 does not make 2. 1 + 1 makes 11. Because you move one tiny thing, you make one small decision, and like a butterfly effect, it affects everything else.
Yeah.
So
often in imperceptible ways.
Absolutely. Yeah. Ways that you won't have that repercussion perhaps for weeks, months, or years.
Yeah.
You know, everything we decide to do, from what food we eat, to what clothes we buy, to where we go on holiday, to where we go to school, where we work, who we work for, who we work with, everything has an effect socially, economically, or environmentally, right? And oftentimes, all at the same time. So just like that Academy Award-winning movie with Michelle Yeoh, you know, Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Yeah, that's a great one.
That's how I explain holistic management and holistic decision making. Because it doesn't matter if you've got sheep or cows or goats, or you're like us, that's more of a polyface farm that has a little bit of everything, or you don't have land at all. You go to the grocery store, you buy things, and depending on what you buy, that is going to push the food system in one direction or another. And I feel like, especially in agriculture, as producers, but not just as agriculture and producers, just in general, the way society has evolved, we have lost our sense of responsibility for our decisions, right? Life happens to us. It's not that we're making our lives, making decisions. Life happens to us. Nothing is my fault. Everything, you know, it's like, oh, it's that guy who did it, or the government decided to do this, or my brother decided, you know, it's like, no. We have this opportunity to co-design our lives. We choose how we want to live. And that may sound elitist for people in really poor situations, whether it's economically or socially or environmentally poor, but at the same time, it can be and should be empowering. It's about us deciding, I've had enough. I want my life to be like this. I want my quality of life to be this. I want my boundaries to be this. I am going to work to go here. And we all have that power. No matter where we are, where we grew up, how we grew up, what resources we have now. If you've only got 2 pennies that you can rub together, rub them together and make fire. You know? Yeah. It's like, so really, for me, holistic management is about empowering ourselves, taking that control back about our lives, and creating the communities that we want and the future that we want.
So with that said, can you give me some examples of perhaps unconventional ways that you're putting this into practice? Because obviously you have animals. We could talk about how you're moving them around your land, but that part has been done ad nauseum at this point. How are you working through the complexity of your life with these frameworks in ways that people might not suspect?
So here's one. We often talk about the holistic context, right? Or the whole text, or depending on how you want to do it. There's different pieces, but the key piece is your quality of life statement. And this is based on your values. This is based on how you want to live your life right now, right? Holistic management is all about long-term decision-making, how do you want your environment, whether it's your farm, your community, the world, to be in 200 years? And that's what guides our decision making, right? But at the same time, while we're looking way down the road, we need to not burn ourselves out, which we've done several times, as the story has told.
Oh, yes. We
have to not burn ourselves out while we're doing that, right? I'm always saying we can't serve from an empty cup, right? So making sure our cup is filled. And so how do we ensure that a quality of life that we have right now is going to help us get there to that long term, right? So a couple years ago, the first full year after all the repercussions of the pandemic was finished, right? Yeah. Because during the pandemic, we had people calling us all the time wanting to come and volunteer at the ranch, come and help, right?
Sure.
Because agriculture was a special sector. You could travel, you could move around, and you could get out and breathe. If you were stuck in a tiny little apartment, you need to get out. Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. So we had lots of people helping us, great people helping us during the pandemic. Then things started going down. Life started to get back to quote unquote normal. So that first summer, because summer's our high season because of the gardens, that first summer was a really nasty drought. Normally we have 2 months a year where we call the no growing period, July, August, right? So the rains had stopped at the end of April. Everything was dead or dying by the end of May. And we had 5 months of no growth. Everything was oxidizing. We couldn't harvest our garlic because the land had turned to stone.
Yeah.
And we had no help because it was the first summer really after the end of the pandemic and everybody wanted to travel. Nobody wanted to work at the ranch.
Yeah.
So we were all alone. It was just the two of us. And we had by this time kind of created enough of a momentum, enough production where we, with our physical limitations, were running ourselves ragged. We couldn't keep going. We were burnt out. And we sat down, we're like, this is not the life that we wanted. This is not the quality of life that we wanted. So I was like, okay. So I sat my husband down and we went through, our standard Savory holistic context development process and, our values over actions and really trying to focus, what is it that we want? Trying to identify what was missing here. And what we determined was we were missing time.
Yeah.
We were missing time to enjoy the ranch instead of just working it. Time to ride our horses, which we hadn't been doing. I was like, why else have horses, right?
Yeah,
ride them. We hadn't
They're
ridden them.
expensive decoration.
They're expensive decoration. We hadn't ridden in like a year, right?
Wow.
I was like, okay, so no, that's not working. Time as a couple, and that I think is really the key for us. It was that, we were both working so hard, running so hard, chasing after something that we weren't even sure what it looked like. And we were exhausted. And our only conversations had to do with what needed to be done next.
Yeah.
Or putting out fires.
Just keeping your head above water.
Totally.
Yeah.
And was like, this is not working. So we made this one itty bitty little change. And we decided that at the end of the summer, so when we go into our slower fall winter season, when we would then be only delivering every other week to San Sebastian instead of every week like we did this summer, I was like, okay, those alternate Wednesdays is going to be date day. So, and we were super strict with date day. It was like, okay, we'd go to like a museum in Pamplona that we'd never been to. Yeah. We saw amazing things. We'd go for lunch. We'd find a restaurant. There was one day when it was raining and we had a Netflix day, which was great because we never give ourselves permission to just be like, I'm going to be lazy and stay in bed and like binge a series. Yeah. It's like, no. So, it was just these really small things. And what we saw was that our relationship as a couple strengthened so much.
Nice.
Yeah. So it was really like, okay, so if we're really talking about putting quality of life in the center, quality of life starts with us. Yeah. And us as the two of us, our relationship, right? Because in holistic management, we talk about wholes and overlapping wholes, So me as a person or you as a person, we are the conjunction of millions and billions of cells and everything, but we are a whole. We make decisions for ourselves. And then we as a couple, well, it's like me and my husband or you and your partner, we are a different whole, but that whole has different needs and wants than us as individual wholes.
Definitely.
So how do we manage those different and sometimes competing needs? Then you get bigger. You throw kids into the situation. Are these kids small? Are these kids going off to college? Do they have partners and they're bringing in all that complexity? Yep. Then if you in your community, whether it's a village of 20 or 50 like ours, or, an apartment block where you've got 500 people living there, or, so you've got community, you've got town. So it's like all of these overlapping and what seemingly look like competing interests. It's not that they're competing interests, but they all do have influence on us and us on them. So how can we be living our best lives, being our best selves with all of these external influences and inputs and our outputs? So that's really where I think the fun part of holistic management comes into, is really getting comfortable and understanding and living and breathing within that complexity, and then making it work for us to create the lives we want.
And it's a constant navigation and renegotiation as new information comes in, as the ecology that you're working with evolves, as new options and decisions come up all the time. So it's a very involved and dynamic way of navigating this complexity. At least in my, what is it now, 3 years of learning the system and putting it into practice into my own life, that's really been my takeaway. Like, it's happening, it's evolving in real time at all moments. And it has really pushed me to see beyond my own needs, my own selfish desires, and really look at, okay, what are these systems? What are these other wholes that I'm operating within? How do I contribute? How do I take from each of those things? And how can I, go beyond being a cog in a system like this and be a co-collaborator or co-creator? And this is something that my partner and I, Alba, are always negotiating. We've done and revised a few times our own holistic context. And yeah, it's something that is increasingly becoming part of our daily vocabulary as we learned to understand almost, like the imperceptible water that you swim in, right? It's always around you, but if you don't learn to pay attention to it, if you don't look for the indicators or the signals of how to navigate a given moment or a given opportunity, it passes you by. And this is something that has really changed for us since we've been incorporating this in how we make decisions and how we navigate our relationship as well. How has this been for you? Like, what were some of the early patterns or realizations when this was new as compared to now, where you're beyond a decade into it and this is a kind of a background part of your life, I assume?
Yeah, I mean, the beauty of this all is that it's constant learning, right? And I think as we've really gotten into this, what we have understood is that we hold ourselves perhaps to too high of standards and too high of expectations and perfectionism, overachievers. And the fact is that the world doesn't work that way. Nature doesn't work that way. In order to be resilient, we need to be, as you say, constantly on the lookout for what's coming. How can we adapt to that? And really, so whereas I think in the past we were much more rigid with our decision making, it's like we've planned to do this and we will do this no matter what.
Yeah.
It's much more, the feedback loop of, you plan to do this, you monitor, and then you see, that didn't quite work.
Yeah.
So I'm often telling, young entrepreneurs that the key to being an entrepreneur is to fail as quickly and cheaply as possible.
Sure.
And I feel like that is applicable with just about everything. It's like, do not marry yourself to a decision. Do not marry yourself to a scenario or to a vision of what something, something's supposed to look like, It's all going to work out as it should if you just let it and let go. Letting go doesn't mean not being active and on top of it. It just means, I think, also forgiving yourself.
Or not being married to certain outcomes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. You've got this grand vision, and so stick with that grand vision, but the details move and change and shift. And I think that's also where a lot of our growth comes from, is because we're learning. There's a lot of humility in there. There's a lot of forgiveness in there. There's a lot of, I think these really important values that maybe in your 30s or 20s you don't quite have, right? But as you get older, you kind of be like, oh, okay, actually, what's really important to me? And really important to me is, being happy, being calm, not feeling burnt out, not feeling overrun, eating good food, being in a beautiful place, being with great people, and learning and just, constantly doing better, but not like a perfectionist kind of way, but just in a much more, humble, calm kind of way. So I don't know. It's a lot of touchy-feely kind of stuff that I was never really into. I was very type A for a very long time. And thankfully, holistic management and failing a lot has helped me to get over that. But I feel like these days, relationships are just so much more giving, more loving, much less transaction based.
Yeah.
You know, it's very much focused on abundance. You know, the more you give, the more you receive.
Yeah.
You know, and so it's just like it's that growing, that creating, that building. So yeah.
Yeah. I think one of the things that stood out to me most and kind of propelled me to pursue the courses in holistic management was seeing of so many different courses that I've taken and areas of study that I had entertained before. This was the first one where humility was baked into the process, right? Everything else kind of goes forward thinking, okay, this process or this way of looking at things, this is correct. And if you do it correctly, you will get correct results.
Yeah.
Whereas this one has been, you know, as I get deeper into it as well, always assume you're wrong.
Yep, absolutely.
You know, any plan that you make, all the preparations that you do, don't go forward with them thinking that this is how it's going to be, this is how it's going to come out, and that you, with all of your infinite wisdom and planning, are going to, you know, get to the result that you thought you were going to. And so creating these fast learning loops, you can call it, you know, failure or cheap failure, like you mentioned before, but there's other ways of looking at it too, of just like, you don't know until you get feedback from the real world.
Yeah.
And you don't need to internalize that as failure. It's just, this is part of the learning journey. You go in with some assumptions, but you keep your head up and you always pay attention so that the feedback comes in quickly and you can adapt in real time. And this has been, first of all, really in line with my own experience of the previous place where I started a farm in Guatemala. You do all your studies, you make your plans, and then something totally different happens. And again, you know, you could be looking at that as, oh, either I made a mistake and I need to do it differently, or just realize that when you're dealing with complex systems, of course it's not going to come out the way that you plan, and that's not wrong, right? And coupling your expectations from right or wrong based on your expectations.
Absolutely.
And rather just, okay, I'm not in control of this entire picture, nor should I be, because you cannot internalize nor process the amount of information required to interact with the complexity of a natural system. And so remaining humble, observant, and flexible is really the only way to navigate life, right? And this has really served me in taking some steps back and not feeling disappointed as we came into this place where you're staying with us now.
Yeah.
I mean, you've seen some of what we're working on and the complexities that we're trying to navigate. I don't know if anybody can hear the baby ducks chirping in the back. We just got baby ducks yesterday, and they've been a source of entertainment this entire time.
They're just so cute.
They're so cute. I think they just woke up for a second, just hoping to join the conversation and prove my point that I did not come in here expecting to get little ducks, and now we have them chirping on a podcast episode. So I guess to get to what I was going to is that I've embraced much more of a flow of just like, this is something that we're doing and is taking us along for the ride as much as we are kind of at the steering wheel and making it go somewhere. And there's going to be difficulties. There's going to be moments of joy. We're going to require some rest along the way. And I've gotten out of what used to be my mentality of trying to find a work-life balance and just realizing that I have a really dynamic life that sometimes requires a bunch of extra work, sometimes requires you to shut up and sit down and pay attention and absorb information, and other times it's realizing your limitations and relaxation. How are you at with this much more advanced in practice ability and you know, time with this system in the development of your own farm? Partly because, you know, we have very similar characteristics. We're not terribly far from one another. You're about 4 hours further north than I am. You've got about the same land base of 3.5 hectares. We're 3 hectares here. And, you know, you're mixing animals and cultivars. And tell me about how this has helped you to get as far as you have.
I think it's really just the understanding that this is a lifestyle. This is not a job, but it was also a choice.
Yes.
It was a very conscious choice. You know, I had very clear when I was a teen that I wanted a horse ranch and to marry a cowboy. Well, I've got a horse ranch, and I don't know how, but my Basque engineer husband has now become much more cowboy than I ever was. And we talk about this regularly, you know, and that's also why we're trying to focus so much on quality of life and making sure that we have the time and we enjoy the ranch instead of just work it.
Yes.
Because, you know, any land base, any business, any entrepreneurial activity will take all of your life energy that you are willing to give it.
Yes.
It never finishes.
Yeah.
It's not like a 9-to-5 job where you go home at the end of the day and you go and you do something else. It's like there's always something to be done. So it's really trying to put those limits. Balance, I don't know is the right word either, but really trying to say, okay, I am only human. I can only do so much. And so this is where I'm going to put that energy and understand that energy is going to come back in so many unexpected and beautiful ways. So I unfortunately during the pandemic had some pretty serious back surgery. Yeah, and so that it went really well, which is great. But what I understood as really well, which would have been full recovery and going back to my life and everything, taught me very quickly that there are limitations.
Yeah.
And though, thankfully, I have a lot more physical mobility than many people, it's not what I would have expected living on a ranch and, you know, riding horses all the time. So I don't ride anymore. I would love to, but can't. I have to really take care of myself with how much time. I'm pretty good in the garden. I can spend hours and hours in the garden. I don't do inclines very well. And most of the ranches got 16% or more slope.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, gosh, they really woke up. They're really loud now,
they're really
aren't they?
active.
But I think it comes back again to that humility piece. You know, I think when you're a certain age and you come from a certain background, you've got this like Superman or Superwoman complex, you know, and it's like, I can do everything and anything. And you come to a certain point and you're like, well, actually, maybe not.
Yeah.
So then it's like, okay, so understand, you know, what feels good, what needs to be done, what can I do? And then it's learning to really empower others and delegate to others and be like, okay, you are much better at plant identification than I am. I am not a plant nerd. I do understand ecosystem function pretty well. So I focus more on that, on like the teaching part.
Yep.
I focus more on the farm advisory, the hand holding, working with farmers and ranchers to understand how the decisions that they're taking is having one effect or another, and what kinds of things maybe they could try and test out. You know, but when it comes to like EOV, ecological outcome verification, the Savory Institute's very tried and tested scientific-based methodology for ecological systems monitoring, ecological process monitoring, regeneration of soils, I have come to the understanding, I can't do that. I can't be crawling around on the ground. And that's okay. Yeah. It was the that's okay that took me a long time to get to. So whereas I can do all the computer work, somebody else needs to be out in the field doing that stuff. So I think, again, it's coming to understand, you know, what our strengths are, what we want, what we're trying to achieve. And maybe, again, it's the over 40 thing. Now it's very much looking behind and trying to mentor, trying to bring people up, trying to empower people. You know, for me right now, a lot of what is important is trying to find the next generation of trainers and advisors. Yeah. You know, like I said, you know, we're half of Spain. You know, we cannot really affect that kind of change at scale being just me and one or two other people. Yeah. We need to have an army of well-trained people who understand ecosystem process, who understand holistic decision making, who can help farmers and ranchers, you know, guide them on their journeys, Within holistic management, we never tell people what to do. No, this is like rule number one. We are not predicative. We can help you to understand how what you are going to do is going to have one effect or another, depending on where you are on the brittleness scale, what your context is. But it's always going to be up to them to make the decision. Here's 4 or 5 potential options, or why don't you go and talk to this person or talk to this person? But, so we need to have more people who have that understanding who can then help us to scale up. So anyway, that was a bit of a long tirade.
No, not at all. And this actually makes me think how you're taking this framework into other aspects of your work, because you're the one in your couple that does most of the traveling, does the advocacy, is the voice of what you're promoting. And I don't know if you feel comfortable talking about going into your work in Brussels soon with Iara. Is that something you want to talk about yet or no?
Well, the contract's not done yet.
Okay.
but we can talk about that kind of direction. And that's really exciting because that feels like full circle.
Okay. Let's give some background before we go into it.
Yeah, please.
So IARA being the
European Alliance for Regenerative Agriculture.
That's the one.
Is a farmer-led organization that was incubated thanks to climate farmers who understood that it needed to be the farmers and the farmers' voice who was out there at national but really European level to make that change in our eco-agro food system, right? We needed to show that the way that our food system is now isn't working, and that we as the farmers who are the ones on the ground, we are the stewards of these land bases, we're the ones who need to be, our voices need to be heard. We need to be understood that there are other ways to produce food. There are ways to produce food that are healthier for the soil, healthier for animals, healthier for people. And so really bringing together some of the pioneers in Europe with these very diverse experiences, very different contexts, different rainfalls, different sizes, different blends of animals and gardens, whatever. But we are all very aligned on regeneration of the ecosystem, regeneration of our communities, regeneration of how agriculture fits into the wider society. So, long story short, we came together last October, formalized IARA, and then have been spent the last 6-8 months really trying to make clear with internally who we are, what we believe, what is important, so that we can get those messages out to Brussels. So 6 weeks ago, after a really amazing, fulfilling collaborative process amongst a number of the farmers, we presented our farmer and agro-ecosystem-centric CAP reform proposal, CAP reform being the Common Agriculture
the white paper
Policy.
that came out from that.
Yeah. Well, we had a white paper, and then we had a proposal, an idea of a proposal, and then we had a whopping 54-page, 180-source document that laid out how we felt that we could have a structural change within the European agri-food system and how farmers could be supported through their transition towards a more regenerative way of producing food and interacting with our soils and communities based on photosynthesis and soil cover. So rather than a lot of very complex verification criteria or certification criteria that you're seeing out there, what is regenerative agriculture and all the rest, there's one by a big organization that I recently heard of that has 90 indicators of what regenerative is. We just boiled it down to what really matters, and what really matters for soil health is photosynthesis and soil cover. So the beauty is that these two things, rather than other ecosystem services that doesn't really translate to being monitored by satellites very well, photosynthesis and soil cover does.
Yeah.
So this could really simplify the way farmers are rewarded for producing food or for stewarding the environment, whether they're producing food or not. So if you're into rewilding or if you're into conservation or whatever, if the focus is photosynthesis and soil cover, we're all going in the same direction. And what I love about it is that in the same way that holistic management is not predicative, our proposal is also not practice-based. It is outcome-based. Mm-hmm. Do what you need to do in order to get moving in the direction where you're improving photosynthesis and soil cover year on year, and quickly.
Yeah.
Because the world's on fire. We're in a hurry. We need to get this done.
Indeed.
Yeah. So that's a bit of the CAP proposal that we put together, and I'm really proud of it. And what's very exciting is that in a full circle kind of way, being able to take that background of advocacy in Brussels previously for African bioenergy producers, take those skills, that knowledge, and interestingly, quite a bit of my network over the past decade or so has actually transitioned into agriculture. Regen ag is the sexy thing. So it's great that that's fertile ground that's already prepared, that I can just go back into Brussels and be using my experience and take the voice of my fellow farmers from IARDA and really be that leading voice of progressive farmers in Brussels. And what's fantastic is that, we're just starting, but already the reception has been extremely positive. And I think it's because we're offering solutions that are innovative and doable, as opposed to just being entrenched in one side of the argument or the other and not moving, right?
Sure.
We've got this middle road where we're offering a way to continue to have the support that the Common Agriculture Policy provides without having to actually change the law or, but still ensuring that we are moving quickly towards a way of producing food that is nutrient dense, low input, focused on photosynthesis, focused on soil health, and making sure that the agri-food system in Europe is moving in the direction that we need it to be if we're all going to be around in 50 years.
Well, so many times in your background story, you talked about the things that you were getting into seeming like they were maybe a decade too early. Whereas it seems like the time is right for this type of work, and that the voices and the decision makers in Brussels are probably much more receptive to the concepts that you would be bringing, the advocacy for Regen Ag, than they might have been 5-10 years ago, certainly. Does this feel like there is a way or an opportunity to get things done, given the political climate that there is at the moment?
Absolutely. And I can tell you, having been ahead of the game for so long, it's really great to feel the flow when you're actually with the wave, right? You're not ahead of the wave, you're not behind the wave, you're just surfing that wave. And that's really exciting, because then it really feels like maybe this time we have the opportunity to get things done. I'm not naive. I've been around the Common Agriculture Policy and reform for well over 2 decades. I know, moving the Titanic is a very slow process, but at the same time, I feel like this is the moment. Yeah. And, we're talking about the cap for 2028, which is still a number of years down the road, and I don't expect that we're going to have this complete shift.
Overhaul or transformation.
No. But I really feel like that there's enough momentum right now where we can create some real substantial change and really get that movement going. So if we're talking about the cap for 2033 or even 2038, but we've already really laid the groundwork, normalized these kinds of metrics, normalized that, having, soil cover year round is normal.
Well, and worth aspiring to. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because,
absolutely.
I'm sure you've noticed in the Spanish culture here, it's very common to prize places that have no vegetation aside from the things that they are growing. And that might be olives, that might be something else, but basically moonscape plus cultivars barely holding on to life with drip irrigation for life support. I don't know.
Absolutely. I mean, being married to an engineer who likes everything neat and tidy and in straight lines and rows,
Yeah.
whereas I am much more systems-based, complexity, abundance, resilience. He sees the garden and goes, "Oh my God, this is chaos." And I'm like, honey, look at all the different functional groups and how everything is working with all the exudates that are all supporting each other.
We are the same people in our respective partnerships. Yeah.
Yes. I know you feel me.
I do.
Yeah. So in that sense, I think I have some experience in explaining to those who may be used to the clean and tidy way of producing, and pristine, of managing a landscape or producing food. But yeah, but I think that's a good point, and we haven't talked about mindset. Mindset is the key to all change, but is also the biggest key to regeneration, to moving towards different, these different kinds of food production systems that we're talking about, and different kinds of decision making and holistic management and all of these things. Today I was visiting one of my students who did the holistic management training with me last year and who I am doing advisory for and continuing to visit regularly. He and his wife produced these amazing steaks that we had for dinner tonight. They're about 40 minutes from here, Saler de Viñes, and we were talking a lot about mindset today, and that's what he's coming up against. He's got some fields that are very dominated by annuals, and and he's seeded perennials and a really great perennial mix, but they're just not coming up. And and I'm like, it's okay, okay. Yeah. Let these annuals dry out. They will become fantastic. Mantillo. Mulch, thank you. They will become fantastic mulch when it's hot this summer. Just bring the cows in there, bale feed them, and just get that mulch down on the ground. Yeah. And you will see in the fall, when the rains come back, that those perennials that should have come up last fall will start to come up. And he's like, I understand the concept. Mentally, I understand the concept. But then it's like he sees all of this quote unquote wasted feed, right? And it's just like it clenches his gut, and I was like, but it's not wasted feed. You're feeding the soil. Yeah. And he's like, no, I get it, but it almost physically hurts. Trying to do it. So
that's a transitional.
Absolutely, and I think we need to be more sensitive to those kinds of internal struggles. I mean, this is a guy who 10 years ago with his wife decided that they were going to regenerate her family's farm using cattle, and it was going to be all, grass fed, and, they feed some grain when they need to sometimes, context based, but, they manage forests, they manage pastures, he does some bales to cover during the summer, but they made this conscious decision that they wanted to work with the environment and work with nature and move in that direction. Not everybody's there yet. So if someone who has already a decade ago made this conscious decision that that's where they want to go and is still running up against these mindset challenges and having a hard time moving forward.
From previous ways of managing.
Exactly. Someone who isn't there yet, or someone who maybe is feeling pushed into it, and that's
going to require that much more compassion and understanding.
Absolutely.
And meeting them where they're at.
Absolutely. And patience. And repetition. But yeah, so I think that also comes back to this need for an army of trainers and advisors, because you're going to need that not just technical but also emotional support as these predominantly family farmers are transitioning, going into this brave new world that is just scary as hell.
It's so cool to talk to you about this, because I have been working in this space now, assisting farmers in their transition for much shorter than you have. And to get an insight from your experience, not only from doing this with farmers, but also navigating the complexity of this at a political level, which I don't even want to touch right now. That's complex enough. I mean, For me, it makes me feel better about not only the difficulties that I have in managing these conversations and the expectations of people who are on this process, and realizing that like I don't need to make this happen for them. And it's okay for everybody to feel doubts and to feel like a failure when things don't go right. And that is a natural and necessary part of the transition.
Yeah.
Not even something to shy away from, but even to embrace at certain degrees and use as fuel, hopefully, something that doesn't derail you, but helps you to connect with the emotional side of what this very bumpy road is, to work with degraded ecosystems, limited tools, constant variables, and try and get something more positive out, hopefully next time, you know?
Absolutely. And that's when you're talking about an individual producer or a producer and his family or her family, right? When you get to the next level, you get to a company. As we know, companies are not humans. Companies have minds and
You should
lives
tell
of their
our
own.
home country that.
Oh my God. Yeah. Okay. Hello. I don't think the Supreme Court we have at the moment is really the one who's going to listen to that.
Probably not that one.
No, but yeah. No, but so I had the honor, the opportunity. I was asked by a rather large company producing food very conventionally here in Spain to come in and help them on their regeneration path. They had decided, or the CEO himself had decided that in order to have a future for the company as well as his personal legacy, that he was going to do a complete 180 with the company strategy, and we were going to go down this road of regeneration.
Wow.
And it was like an amazing opportunity. So they bought this 140 hectare farm, a very degraded pine forest land. They had some cattle that they had bought with the project, some infrastructure, and it was like, okay, this is the future. So this is where we're gonna go. And me and my arrogance, which I now recognize, said to him, okay, great, but I am so against greenwashing that I will not help you to regenerate this land, which I know I can and we can do together, unless we're gonna, be working in a regenerative way within the mother company as well. So he was like, okay, I get it. I understand it. So we went to do the holistic context for the mother company. A lot of people, 95% of which have nothing to do with this new land base. Talking about, values and, this new strategy and where this is going and, what their needs are, to feel comfortable to move into this new direction and all this, quality of life and all these kinds of things. Well, nobody had ever talked about this kind of stuff in this company before.
Sure, all these are new concepts. Yeah.
Totally. And they freaked out.
Yeah.
They freaked out. And so, a couple weeks later, was talking with the CEO, and trying to plan what, the next steps, right? Because we were doing a holistic grazing plan for the cattle and, doing ecological monitoring and, how we, what to do. Because it was very clear when my colleagues and I were doing this holistic context process with these corporate directors, it was very clear that this wasn't the moment. So we were just doing basic background work, right? And it was like, okay, so when are we going to go in and do the next piece? And the CEO, and I'm sure in a combination of fear and frustration and a lot of other emotions he wasn't used to dealing with, being a man in control of power of this rather large company, got really angry. He got really angry because of the 20 or so people who had been there in this what we thought was a very successful event at the moment and during this time. 7 people had sent to the anonymous complaint box that this was a waste of time and that this was the wrong direction to go. And so he, who had put his entire reputation on the line with this strategy shift, it was like, he didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
He didn't know what to do. Yeah. And so we put the brakes on stuff, which at the time I was like, oh my God. But I took it as a failure.
Sure.
But then I understood that there is a whole lot of complexity in that company and that company culture and the people who are there. That has nothing to do with me. It was that the company hadn't prepared the ground in order to go through and have it, right? So, and then we had the opportunity a couple of weeks ago to be with Alan Savory and his wife.
We did indeed.
And I was sitting next to him, and I was like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what I did wrong. And I explained to him this whole situation, and in his very wise sage sort of way, his response was, slow down. Just slow down. And it goes back to what you said before. We have to meet people where they are. I went in with these very set expectations. Okay, we're going to get the decision makers together because this is what we've been trained to do. We get the decision makers together. We do a holistic context and we start doing holistic decision making. Now, this needs to be so much slower. So my team is with them this week and they're doing ecological outcome verification, EOV. They're doing the baseline data. So we're just doing some basic, a little bit more than basic, ecological literacy, learning, so that all of the stuff that I had been telling them for these last several months, about ecosystem process and, time and recovery time for the land and mulch and, all this stuff, so that it all starts to click and all starts making sense, so that when they are ready, they know where I am.
Yeah.
They can just call and I'll be down. And so I was talking to one of the colleagues from them earlier this week. And so they want me to come and do a training end of this year. Not for the company, for local farmers. But hey, it's a step.
It is.
It's a step. And so it's like, okay, we have to go the pace that they're ready for. So I think when we're talking about, farmers and farm families, that's already complex enough because we're running up against so much fear. Fear of people losing their land, fear of people losing their families, fear of people losing their lives. I mean, we haven't even begun to talk about suicide rates for farmers and ranchers.
Indeed.
Losing their reputation, that the neighbors are all going to think that they're weirdos. There's just so much fear in that change.
Yeah.
And that's just happening at a personal level. So when we take it up to this next step and we're talking a corporate.
Yeah. And now the complexities of the dynamics of the corporate culture that might have, the relationships in between people, their reputations, their egos.
Absolutely. Yeah. So when we're talking about these kinds of big, important structural changes, or something as big as we're going to change the common agriculture policy in 4 years.
Yep.
It's like, There's so many layers where that change has to come, and we have to do it at the pace that it takes.
Yep. Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's tricky, especially when it just feels like there's so much urgency with all of the very real threats and disasters looming. It can be hard to step out the brakes, but at the same time, accelerating things beyond their thresholds often means losing the progress that's been made, and having the humility and the patience to go at the pace and meet people where they're at in order to get things to continue to move forward, even if it's much slower than you'd want. That's admirable. That's something I still aspire to having the wisdom for.
That's because I'm so much older than you, but it's fine. You'll get there. But I think it's really that. I mean, I often have to stop myself from sounding apocalyptic because we are in a hurry. The world's on fire, 60 harvests and probably 30, or 15.
Depends on where you are. Yeah, it's not a blanket.
No, absolutely.
There's already places that have failed, where you can't produce anything more, that were productive regions very relatively recently.
Absolutely. And in fact, this is a conversation I was having earlier this week. Was, it's like talking about how Spain and Portugal are going to be at risk of climate refugees. And I'm like, becoming climate refugees. And I'm like, no. It's already been a region of climate refugees for 30, 40 years.
Yeah, exactly.
If you look at, España vaciada, the empty Spain, all of the small villages and small communities that have just completely vacated, emptied, and they've all had this massive urbanization. They went because it was impossible to make a living, right?
Yeah.
So this is already happening. But but at the same time, we can only go as fast as people are ready for. So,
including ourselves. Like,
Yeah.
I would love to go faster too. I'm not ready for it.
Yeah.
I'll be the first to admit it. Yeah.
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 Yeah. So, I really feel like this should be ended on a high note rather than a low
Well,
note.
so
This
that's
got
exactly
really depressing.
No worries, because this is exactly where I wanted to go with it too. And it's easy to complain or to point out the things that are difficult and challenging, but I know you're a person full of hope and excitement. I'm actually amazed with the energy that you approach all of this with.
It's a bit obnoxious, I know.
No, not at all. This is what I feed off of. This is what I also draw inspiration from myself. Where are you seeing points of hope and the things that keep you energized and excited despite the risks and the fear that can easily creep in?
Well, that wave that I was talking about that we're riding at the moment, it's like it's finally the right time. I'm seeing pockets of that everywhere. I was at a meeting workshop this week of 9 different landscapes from across the Iberian Peninsula who are coming together as a network, because together we're so much stronger.
Yeah.
When we used to, as we say in Spanish, be 4 cats, cuatro gatos, when we were like really dispersed and just a couple like weirdos playing around.
Yep.
That we're far past that now. We're an actual movement. We are a community. We are in every community. You may not see us everywhere. We may not be so visible all the time, but that shift has absolutely happened. If you're looking at the innovation bell curve, right?
Yeah.
We're way past the early adopters. We are well on our way up to
Critical mass. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But because we're all so busy all the time with our farms that are never-ending sources of pleasure and frustration and not enough sleep, we don't take that time to stop and look up and be like, wait a minute, there's a lot of us now.
Yeah.
Wait a minute, all of us together, we have a voice, and I think that's what's really exciting right now, is that all of these, it's kind of like droplets of water. So all these droplets of water are starting to get together to be bigger droplets and then, be puddles, and we're still far away from the ocean, right? But
we're starting to get some flow.
Absolutely. We are totally getting flow. So we are getting flow in Spain. We're getting flow in Portugal, in the UK, in France, in Germany, and that's also where IARDA comes in, because you really think there's just farmers from more than 20 countries, right? There's more than 70 of us. In Spain, we have that the Regenerative Agriculture Association put together a couple of years ago, the map of regenerative farms. There's more than 80 on this map. Yeah. And it hasn't grown just because of lack of funding. But now the association's got some funding, and they are going around and doing, checking out applicant farms a week, a month, and so that map is going to hit 130, 150, 180, in the next, 6, 8, 10 months. And certainly there are more of us out there.
And that's just the farms, to say nothing about the other support businesses that make those farms possible. That's one thing that I've really realized, is that certainly a farm does not exist in a vacuum. And they're dependent on and reliant on not only the people and the companies that buy their produce, but that supply them with the things that they need to produce as well.
Absolutely.
And that is also another area of inspiration that I've seen, is these support networks around the farms that enable them to do what they do and find good customers for their produce.
That's why we talk about the agri-food ecosystem.
Exactly.
Because it's not a supply chain. This is not linear.
Yes. It's a web.
It's absolutely, and it's 3-dimensional, right? It's up, down, sideways. We are all connected.
Yeah.
So, and that connection is what feeds us all and makes us bigger and better and stronger. And that's where the abundance comes from. And I think that's where the hope comes from.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, similar for me. I mean, we both work in our own ways of creating community and creating connections and deeper relationships around this space. My own with the Climate Farmers community, but also in kind of side projects. The Discord network around this podcast has been really powerful. The increasing community around hydrological restoration, which is becoming a specialty within my own consulting, and the overlap increasingly of all of those things, right? People seeing the relevance and the necessity of hydrological management in their farms or in their businesses, and finding points of communication between all of these different little side groups that used to be in isolation are starting to talk and share resources more and more. I really think, like you said, we're on maybe even just the early cusp of a wave that is growing right now. And feeling that momentum and feeling that you're not alone in this as well, being able to share your stories, feel compassion and connection with other people who are on their own version of this journey as well. It's nourishing.
Yeah.
It definitely gives you extra energy when you're feeling all crapped out.
Yeah. We are not alone.
We are not. Yeah. Definitely. We said that right as the ducks go silent. Well, look, so let's wrap this up then by telling our listeners how they can get in touch with you, find more about the resources and the trainings that you're constantly offering.
Yes, no, happy to. So if you speak Spanish, our website is hubdelnorte.com. You can contact us at the info email or check me out on LinkedIn. So Meghan Sapp, Meghan, just like the former Duchess. I was so glad when they got married. Finally, people knew how to spell my name. Now they're no longer royal. I don't know what they are, but people still know how to spell my name now. So anyway, so Meghan Sapp on LinkedIn, please reach out. I do training throughout the year in Spanish, but I am also very excited. We are offering our first full comprehensive course in English at the ranch the first 2 weeks of July, and we've still got a couple spots open. So
awesome.
Yeah, that's going to be really great because it'll bring in a bunch of international people, different perspectives, different contexts. Come spend your summer holidays with us. And we will be taking a break in the middle for San Fermin in case anybody wants to go and run with a bull. I'll be sleeping, but please, welcome to come. Please reach out.
Amazing. Well, let's see if you're the final push that I need to take the test and get my accredited professional finally. I've taken the courses years ago with Sheila in the UK, and I've been on the fence about actually going for my accreditation so far. But more than anything, thank you so much for making the time to come and spend a bit of time here at the house with me and Alba. It's been such a joy to host you, and I can't wait to come and visit you in Inigo pretty soon.
Pretty soon, yes. No, we can't wait to have you guys too. It was so fantastic meeting you guys a couple of weeks ago. It was like real kindred spirits, and I'm just so glad that it worked out on my Catalan tour this week to come and stop by and hang out with you guys. So, thank you.
Look, Megan, these 2 bottles of wine are not going to drink themselves. What do you say we wrap up the interview and get on with the evening?
Absolutely. Thanks again.
Thanks once again to Megan. I've included links to the social media accounts for Hub del Norte, Curly Creek Ranch, and as well as the Savory Institute and IARA on the show notes for this episode at regenerativeskills.com. Now, before we wrap this up, just remember that these episodes are only the beginning of the learning resources, design and coaching services, in-person courses, and interactive community that are available through Regenerative Skills. The Discord server is our free community where you can connect with other like-minded listeners, exchange ideas, stories, tips, and resources, as well as interact with me directly and quite a few former guests from this show. Our Instagram account at regen_skills is the best place to see the projects that me and the team are working on, both for clients and collaborators, as well as on our own properties. I'll also be announcing the certification courses, workshops, and gatherings that we've got coming up later this year. If you're interested in getting dedicated support for your own project, you can now schedule a free planning session with one of our team members through the request form on our website. You can also find all the links, show notes, and past resources there at regenerativeskills.com. We truly believe that no matter your experience, your knowledge, abilities, resources, or background, you can be a powerful force for regeneration on this planet, and we're here to help you find your path. So as always, remember to keep taking those little steps every day towards a regenerative future, and I'll be right by your side along the way.